Doctors, have you ever been in a public place and someone shouted, "Is anyone here a doctor?" Or something along those lines? What happened? My toddler had a seizure in an airport and I screamed for a doctor. I was answered first by a military EMT, then a doctor, several nurses, and finally a pediatrician. They got her breathing again and saved her life before the paramedics got there. The first doctor wouldn't let anyone near her unless they told him their medical credentials. The pediatrician was wearing the emptied out, handed off to her husband carrier for their own baby the entire time. They were also kind and reassuring to me at my most terrifying moment. Story 2. I'm an emergency nurse. This has happened numerous times to me. One particular time, though, I'm sat on the Eurostar coming back for Paris, sat in Gare du Nord station waiting to pull away, and the conductor came on the tannoy. "Ladies and gentlemen, is there a doctor aboard? Please come to carriage X." I think, well, hey, I'm not a doctor. That's not me. About a minute later, "Ladies and gentlemen, please, is there a doctor aboard?" I'm thinking, maybe. Nah, there's bound to be someone. The third time they called out, and I was like, screw it, I better go. Some crap is going down. I get to the carriage, and the guy is sweaty, gray, clammy. Seen it plenty of times before. Dude is having an MI. About to collapse, certainly need to get to a hospital, maybe even PPCI to open up the heart arteries. I said to the staff, get the defib, get oxygen, and get an ambulance. I get him all prepped up while we wait, reassure him, and hope he doesn't go into cardiac arrest. His pressure looked like it was going to drop further, makes you realize what you have to be able to do with no equipment, but his pulse felt weaker and thready. So I've seen it done a couple of times before, but I thought, screw it, let's help improve his circulation to perfuse him because he looked like he was going into cardiac arrest. All of a sudden, a tap on my shoulder. "Actually, mate, I wouldn't do that. You want those central vessels nice and dilated so it doesn't cause more damage." And I was like, who the hell are you? "Oh, I'm a cardiologist. I'm pretty hammered though. Can't risk my GMC number on this. Cheers, mate." Story 3. On a late night flight around 4 a.m. or so, lights out, completely silent. Out of nowhere, a lady starts yelling, "He's not breathing, he's not breathing." The guy on my window seat comes out of a deep sleep, leaps up and climbs over me before I even knew what was going on and ran back to the man. A few minutes later, I could feel the plane accelerate a little and the captain come on and said that LAX had cleared a path for us to land directly without delay. The guy was okay. Apparently he was on my connecting flight to Denver. Story 4. I was at my stepson's baseball game, 13-year-old kids. The infielder takes a line drive to the face and drops to the ground. Our coach yells, "Mike, come quick." The other team's coach yells, "Mike, we need you." Two dads sprint onto the field, one from each dugout entrance. Both arrive at the player at the same time and look up at each other and realize they both know each other. Both are orthopedic surgeons named Mike. Story 5. My father-in-law, who is a doctor, had a heart attack while eating dinner with a friend who was also a doctor. They both recognized what was happening and rushed him to the car rather than wait for the ambulance. He drove him at high speed to the very close hospital where my father-in-law flatlined right after arriving. They got him back, but if he had waited at the restaurant, he would have most likely passed away due to the amount of time it would have taken for the ambulance to get there. Story 6. Not a doctor, but I injured my right radius playing soccer when I was 12. When I was down, a man who I'd never seen before had followed my mom after she came over. Turns out the dude was a doctor and his kid was on the opposing team. I didn't learn this after the fact because I was in hecka pain, but the dude identified himself as a doctor to my mom and informed her that I had injured a bone and he told her it needed to be set. Fate be damned, this man set my arm on the side of the pitch in between a notebook splint tied together with socks. This happened out of town, so I get to the ER the next day, and after the x-rays came back, they informed my mom that my arm had been set perfectly, and if we hadn't told them my arm was injured, they would have had a hard time knowing at all. Story 7. Obligatory not a doctor, but story, not a doctor, but was on a plane next to a guy who was really nice and kept trying to chat. This was during the peak of my anxiety struggles, and I had a plan in place to focus on playing Mario Kart the entire trip, so yeah, I was kind of brushing him off. All the while, internally, my panic was starting to set in. I don't know what I did to make it obvious. I was about to flip, but he was like, "Calm down, I'm a doctor, you just need to breathe," and got me ice and kept talking to me to keep me calm and distracted. He was extremely kind in that the entire 4-hour ride, he was very attuned to making me feel better. Towards the end of the flight, he's like, "Yeah, every flight I go on, I have to do my doctorly duties with someone, so it's all right." And as if on cue, the stewardesses responded to commotion in the back of the plane and asked for a doctor. He smiled at me knowingly and then went to help the guy in the back who apparently was having heart palpitations. He ended up being okay. But man, I was so astounded by his niceness that on the flight home, I was just reassured that even if I'm struggling, there will be someone to help, and I hope that if I'm ever needed, I can help too. Story 8. We were on Main Street in Disney World around closing time. A man in his 30s or 40s was walking around as if hammered, staring at the lights on the tops of the buildings. He bumped into a photographer about to take our picture, and my wife, a nurse, said, "Oh crap, he's about to seize." Sure enough, about 5 seconds later, he slowly falls down and starts convulsing. I quickly grabbed a blanket our daughters were using in the stroller and put it under his head so he wouldn't knock himself out. My wife cleared the area and called the shots. Disney's response time was absolutely horrid. She had to scream for a worker to go find an AED, and it wasn't until she yelled at about the third or fourth worker before she found one who even knew what it was. It took about 10 minutes before the on-site medical team finally showed up. For a company that is otherwise run like a well-oiled machine, their emergency responders left a lot to be desired. Story 9. I was once one of those patients when this situation happened. It's kind of a dumb situation, but also pretty funny. I once played Blanche in my university production of Streetcar Named Desire. I had this pain throughout the day of a performance, but decided not to go to a doctor. Well, about 30 minutes before the production, I went to the bathroom and whizzed red liquid. It was like it hit me at once, and I was so uncomfortable and had to whiz every few minutes. I remember the weird sensation, feeling so awful and constantly needing to pee. I told my director our entire production was student-run, so we didn't exactly have an adult say, "Hey, you should go to the doctor." Instead, one of the other drama kids went on the mic and asked the audience if we had a doctor in the audience. When no one responded, one of our lighting techs came up to the booth and told us he was an EMT. He took my pressure, which was fine, but he said we should call it off and send me to the doctor. I was not about to have the entire show stop for me. I told him I was feeling better and that maybe I just started my period and I didn't realize. I told them all it was just jitters. We did the show and it turned out to be a pretty gnarly kidney infection. Story 10. My father-in-law is a doctor. On 2 occasions in church, I have seen him help a little old lady who collapsed from heat stroke. He says it's happened about 5 times. All were fine. The pastor literally didn't even stop his homily as the woman was carried out to the hallway for my father-in-law to look at her. My takeaway is that the church needs to install a frickin' AC. Story 11. A friend of mine's dad is an EMT for the fire department, and he once was on his hands free in the car to my friend who was in the car too, so I could hear everything. He was crossing a motorway bridge when I heard him sigh. My friend asked, "What's wrong?" He says, "I'm going to be late for work," then hangs up. He presumed he was after hitting traffic. He gets home, I'm still in my friend's house, and he explains that there was a car crash on the motorway below him, so he stopped and ran down a slipway to get to the lady out of the car and organize the emergency services. Story 12. Do planes count? Happened on back-to-back flights to my wife. She thought that the first lady would be okay with some fluids on the ground, wasn't able to administer them on the flight, but the lady on the second flight needed an ICU. My wife stabilized her the best she could, but there's only so much you can do on a plane. Thankfully, she had taken a course the prior year specifically about in-flight emergencies, so she knew the hard limits of what can be done on a commercial flight. Also, literally, no one thanked her, neither flight crew or paramedics on the ground. Hell, the paramedics didn't even want to hear vitals. Frickin' United. Story 13. On a Turkish Airlines flight to Istanbul, just after leaving American airspace, the pilot asks if anyone is a doctor and if they are to inform the stewardess, and the guy next to me gets up and says he's an ER doctor. Maybe 2 hours after that, the guy is still gone, they turn on all the lights and inform us that we're making an emergency landing in Iceland. Apparently, this man sitting one section in front of us was having muscle spasms in his throat and cutting off oxygen supply. He'd pass out and his throat would relax, then he'd wake up and the cycle would repeat. The doctor took one look and said, "You need to get him to a hospital or he'll suffocate and pass away." The thing that sucked the most was waiting for 4 hours on a tarmac and not being able to move, and listening to a bunch of schmucks complain about it to stewardesses like it was their or anyone's fault. Story 14. Not a doctor, but I used to be a volunteer EMT and did some combat medic. I also keep an updated CPR qualification. Both times it was at a pool, not the same pool. Once someone started screaming when I was at his buddy's house and was in earshot of the pool. We ran over and someone had been found in the jacuzzi. The guy passed away. CPR can't revive someone once they've passed, though. The second time, some kid injured his head jumping into the pool. I ran inside, grabbed the first aid kit, had someone call 911, I'm in the US, and I bandaged his head until the EMTs could arrive. Talked to the kid, making sure he wasn't having problems communicating. Also, it helps keep him calm. Story 15. At Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, a teenager collapsed and his girlfriend ran to call 911. One middle-aged onlooker was screaming this. Okay, I was an army medic. I assume it is dehydration or something similar. He's very confused and obviously hammered. Probably dehydrated, but he is conscious and is breathing and has a pulse. Got him to some shade and a drink of water. My work here is done. This lady starts yelling, "Are you a doctor?" like a foot from my face. I say no, but he is just dehydrated. 911 was called. Things will be okay. She then runs down the boardwalk calling for a doctor. I stayed with the kid until the ambulance got there. That lady never returned with real medical attention. Story 16. My dad is an ER doctor. We were on vacation in the Dominican Republic at a resort, and one evening the show was a circus show by the pool. There was a part where a clown on a unicycle was supposed to quote unquote fall and then land in the pool, except the guy fell the wrong way, injured his head against the concrete around the pool. Without hesitation, Dad went over and helped the guy until local help could arrive. There was also a time where a kid hurt his arm at an open house for our elementary school. Dad made a splint out of a ruler till the kid could get to the ER. No joke, Dad received a bill from the state of California for the cost of the ruler. Story 17. At a high school basketball game, kid jumps in the air for a rebound and comes down awkwardly on his ankle. You can imagine it. He is immediately in pain and his ankle is obviously hurt, evident from the unnatural angle his foot is positioned in. The trainer and coaching staff rushed out and helped him. And over the PA speaker, someone asked, "If there's a doctor in the house, please report to the floor." I'll never forget two things. One, the way it looked when they threw a towel over his leg. It looked like something you wanted to unsee. Two, the sound of a hushed crowd. That sounds weird, but when there's 700 or so people stoic and quiet, there's a sound. Story 18. Airplane to Vegas. The woman had a sugar-related issue according to the flight attendant afterward. I just told her I was very happy to see their professionalism at work in a crisis. The doc and crew got the woman stable, and we were given priority to Vegas. The pilot basically floored it, which got us into Las Vegas way early enough to get into Hash House a go-go with a reservation. A bit after we ordered, two ladies were standing there screaming, "Great, Happy Mother's Day," except they were shaking a small kid upside down. I got up and moved closer. The little girl was not doing so well, so I reached in and took her away, felt for her sternum and pulled, no luck, so I lifted hard and she was soon screaming for mama. So the need for a doctor on a flight saved a little girl several hours later, Mother's Day in 2012. And free breakfast. The little girl was last seen eating a giant strawberry when I stopped by to thank her parents for paying our bill. She was not a fan of mine, and I'm okay with that. Story 19. My aunt, mom's sister, was out for breakfast one morning when she heard a commotion outside. Being a nurse, she ran outside to see if there was anything she could do. Turns out a lady was hit by a car while crossing the street. As they waited for the EMTs to arrive, she started to do everything she could to save this lady. After the lady was taken to the hospital and my aunt started to make sense of everything, she realized that the lady was trying to save what was actually my dad's sister, so my other aunt. She did not survive, however, there is no doubt in my mind that she didn't do everything in her power to try and save her. Story 20. This is my mom's story. She's an advanced practice nurse, like a nurse practitioner. She and my dad were at a charity dinner for neurological diseases. It was full of doctors. In the middle of it, some guy passed out. Nothing exciting happened. They called 911 and an ambulance came. The truth is, docs can't do much without their fancy equipment. They basically made sure his heart was beating and he was breathing, and that was it. The football player who was the speaker for the night ended up being more helpful than any of the docs because he was able to pick up and move the stage out of the way so the paramedics could get the stretcher into the ballroom. A second time, we were standing in line at a Subway while on a road trip. This elderly woman was in front of us, and she was agitated and talking nonsense. Almost everyone else was trying to avoid her, but my mom stayed close by, trying to talk to her, because she felt like something was up. Within minutes, the woman fainted, and my mom managed to catch her and gently lay her to the ground. Turns out she was having a stroke. My mom recognized the symptoms and was trying to get her to settle down so she could call 911. But even then, she couldn't do anything but call for someone to get her to the hospital. It's not like Grey's Anatomy, where they make a track out of a straw and perform a dramatic emergency procedure to create an airway. They just call 911. Story 21. I once witnessed a situation after a car accident on the highway. I was one of the first cars behind. We are helping the people out of one of the wrecks and behind the barrier to keep them safe. Clearly, an injured arm, etc., pretty stable injuries. The driver's face had visible injuries. Another guy comes to help, announces he is a GP, but has been drinking. He was not driving. He will absolutely not handle the patient, but suggests to us how to control the situation, stabilize the patient, and wait for the emergency services to show up. Story 22. Not medical personnel, was a passenger on aircraft. During the last 30 minutes, the stewardess calls and asks for any available medical personnel. The guy 2 rows behind me seemed unconscious. It went smoothly and we landed early. The stewardess gave strict instructions for everyone to remain seated until EMT came on the plane and took custody of the man. Watched as all of first class stood up anyways and took their bags to egress the jet. This delayed further care to the patient. It was one of the rudest displays I have ever seen in my adult life. Story 23. I was on a red-eye flight from Seattle to DC with my mother-in-law and the rest of my wife's family because my father-in-law is a freaking gambler and would spend $10,000 to save a penny. Anyway, my mother-in-law is a doctor. Anyway, the intercom comes on asking for a doctor. Mother-in-law runs up to the FA station and turns out an old woman had a heart attack and was freaking straight up passing away. She did CPR and revived her, and the plane carried on its merry way. American Airlines gave her 100,000 airline miles for helping out. Story 24. Obligatory, not a doctor, but this is one of the most embarrassing things I've ever said. I was in Los Angeles and was outside my motel having a cigarette when an elderly woman fell down a flight of stairs. I immediately rushed over, and her family was about to move her, so I advised them I knew first aid and asked if they would like help. They agreed, and I got to the husband doing a neck immobilization while I checked her over if there was any red liquid, etc. I figured she had a concussion, and given her age, I advised calling an ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, I delivered my report as first responder. Head injury due to impact, no outside signs of red liquid, pupils responsive but localized swelling detected at the back of the head. They put her into the ambulance and then shouted at me, "Hey, aren't you coming? You're a doctor, right?" I kind of panicked and replied, "No, I'm just Canadian." Epic facepalm moment after that. Story 25. Years ago, when I was in between graduating with a bachelor's and getting into med school, we took a family vacation to an all-inclusive resort. Both parents are doctors. My father is an anesthetist and my mother is a surgeon and did critical care and ER for years. My parents met a couple at the resort who had 2 children with the names of both my brothers. This family was at the pool and hot tub area one evening, and despite the numerous warnings for no children under 14 allowed in the hot tub, this family allowed the 4 or 5-year-old into the hot tub. We had just arrived and the kid stopped breathing and going into convulsions. My parents had already run over by the time the kid was slouching, as my mother said, "Oh boy, that kid doesn't look right." My parents administered CPR, got the kid breathing again, and ended up handing him off to EMS, calling the hospital about the kid in advance, and pretty much getting the staff prepped as much as possible about the kid. The couple promised to name their next child after me to thank my parents for jumping into action. Story 26. Not a doctor, but I was with my German class at a German food place, and a girl from my class started having trouble breathing. She tried to drink water, and it just came spilling back out. Turns out both a doctor and a nurse were in the place, not together, and they ended up arguing about what to do because the Heimlich maneuver helped her a bit. She was able to get some air, the food was still lodged. After a minute of bickering, a large Australian dude, this was in the US, came over, told them they were being ridiculous, and flipped the 16-year-old girl upside down. He gave her a very hard tap on the back, food came flying out, and he sat back down and finished his dinner. Story 27. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I used to be a flight attendant and have had to page for medical assistance more times than I ever thought I would. There has always been, yes, I know, anecdotal, at least one person with medical experience on board, whether it was a doctor, nurse, or EMT, in case that makes anyone feel better. Scariest experience was when a fellow flight attendant started seizing on landing and wasn't secured. Coolest use of equipment was figuring out how to hang an IV from the overhead bin. Alright, if you're learning a thing or two from this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 28. A doctor friend told me he just drinks a glass of wine before and on the flight and just tells people, "Sorry, I've had too many drinks," so that he doesn't have to help. Had a bad experience where he helped someone on the plane and the family kept insisting on his personal details so they could sue him if something went wrong. The airline actually told them his details as they said it was only to thank the nice doctor. Story 29. Not me, but my husband was one of the youth football coaches and my son was on the team. We live next to an army base, so there are always new people moving in and out. The kids were in 5th grade playing tackle football, and suddenly one kid ended up on the bottom of the pile with an injured arm. He is screaming in pain, all coaches are running toward him when a man runs from the top of the bleachers and out to the field and to the boy along with the boy's mother and grandmother. The coaches let him through where he immediately starts to help. The grandma and mother don't know who he is, so they start to scream at him to leave him alone and to get away. The grandma even gets in a few punches to the guy's back that he calmly ignores as his attention is on the boy. My husband grabs her and pushes her back while another coach does the same thing to his mother. Finally, the ambulance arrives, and as the EMTs get out, they smile and say, "Hi, doctor, fancy seeing you here," and then basically did whatever the guy said to do. When the mom heard this, she immediately stopped fighting to get the guy away from her son, but the grandma was still livid. She was even more upset and called this guy every name when he got into the back of the ambulance with the boy to ride with him to the hospital. She only stopped yelling after my husband drove her to the hospital and stormed in to see the same guy's picture hanging on the wall as the head of orthopedics and sports medicine at the army base. Come to find out, he had just purchased a house in town and decided on a whim to come and watch the football game. No one knew who he was except for one coach who told everyone to let him through, but then left a small group to call 911 a split second before all hell went loose with mom and grandma. Due to his actions, the kid ended up not needing surgery to repair an injury that in most cases would require one, and he healed up perfectly fine with no complications. The kid's mother and grandmother were so embarrassed and apologized many times over. Story 30. Not a doctor, but once while my husband and I were at the grocery store, he experienced a seizure. BTW, he was not epileptic and had never had a seizure before. As he went down, I tried to break his fall, asked what was wrong, then started yelling, "Is there a doctor here?" There were no doctors, but two off-duty paramedics were shopping, not even together. They rushed to help my husband, then one ran to call an ambulance. This was before cell phones. My husband later scoffed at me for thinking a doctor would be at the grocery store. I told him, doctors have to eat too. Anyway, that's my "is anyone here a doctor" story from the other side, and I was truly grateful for those paramedics. Story 31. Not a doctor, but a pharmacist. Someone ran in screaming, "Is there a doctor in here?" I ran outside. Well, close as they're going to get, and I know CPR and first aid, and saw a car halfway up on the curb. I thought they had crashed. Turns out there was a woman giving birth in the back seat. I ended up birthing a baby while her husband stood horrified on the sidewalk. That was not how I thought my workday would go. Story 32. My mom was a nurse. She witnessed a kid get hit by a car while on a bicycle. A couple other people were around, so her and the other people rushed to help. My mom ordered one of the other people to call 911 while she helped the kid. The kid had hurt his foot pretty bad. Some other people tried to lift his head, but she also stopped that because if he saw his injured foot, he could have started panicking really bad and make things worse. Apparently, in general, you're not supposed to let people who just got hurt see their injuries because they might panic. The kid ended up being fine but messed up his foot pretty bad. One other time, she was helping a guy who was on a motorcycle who got hit by a pickup truck. It wasn't at high speed, so he didn't immediately pass away. He just had some minor wounds, which she helped with because she carries a bunch of first aid stuff with her all the time. She was also kind of selfless because the dude was laying on the ground and it was hot pavement, so she put her arms under his, so he wouldn't burn them on the pavement, and actually ended up burning her own arms because of it. Both of these times, someone called for a doctor in a way, so it fits the question. Story 33. It happened to me twice while on a plane. One time was for a developmentally disabled adolescent having a panic attack, and the other time an individual was likely experiencing a reaction to medicine. That individual had to be taken off the flight by EMS. Afterward, as I walked back to my seat, a few passengers clapped, and I imagined that this must be what Rudy felt like when he made that last tackle against Georgia Tech. Story 34. Lame story. I was at a final game of a paddle tournament. One of the contestants felt dizzy, and he had to lie down, and everyone knew me there, and I knew I was a medic, so I just got near her, and the exchange was something like, "Hey there, you okay?" "Yeah, doc, I feel dizzy." "Did you eat anything today?" "No, games make me nervous." So I had her raise her legs against the wall, have a glass of Coca-Cola, and 5 minutes later, she was up and running and won the match, so yay, medicine? Story 35. I've got a family member who was a GP in a rural area. First off, her clinic was where everyone went during business hours instead of the nearest ER 40 minutes away. So she was set up for it, used to moonlight in ERs to an extent. The best was on an international flight. They asked for a doc, and she volunteers. I don't know what the final issue was, but I know she had to sit with him the whole flight. That said, they upgraded us to first class for the return trip. Story 36. My dad told me that during the high holidays, very important days of the Jewish year, he was at synagogue when someone fainted. The rabbi called out, "Is there a doctor in the house?" 20 people rushed forward. When he told me that story as a kid, I thought the funny part was that the rabbi called the synagogue a house even though it isn't one. I later realized that the reason it was funny was because so many Jews are doctors, so if you are going to have a medical issue anywhere, a synagogue is the best place outside of a hospital. Story 37. I was dating a lady who had just been awarded her PhD in environmental science. We went out for a meal with some friends, most of which have also got PhDs. There was a loud round of congratulations and an evening of calling everyone doctor. Halfway through the meal, a gentleman across the room started to have a seizure and collapse. Due to the obvious misunderstanding, the waitress came to our table for help. As my friends started to have the awkward conversation about not being that kind of doctor, I, who works in construction, got up and started to apply first aid, a requirement for my job, and ended up getting the gent in the recovery position until the ambulance arrived. The manager waived our bill and referred to me as the real doctor the rest of the night. We didn't have the heart to explain. Story 38. Obligatory. I'm not a doctor, but I did drop out of med school. I was staying in a hotel room with some colleagues for a MUN conference I attended back in 2011, and the kids across from me were playing around in the rooms and hallways. Now, these hotel doors are heavy and close on their own, so they constantly had to be propped open or they would close. One of the kids left his fingers in the doorway between the door and the hinge while looking into the other room, and the door snapped shut, injuring his fingers. The kids panicked, and there was an adult nearby at the time, and they were calling for help while the kid was crying. Nobody was doing anything, so I ended up grabbing his finger to apply pressure and asked someone to grab a bucket of ice. A little while later, we got the ice, stuck his hand in there, and 911 responded with some paramedics. Story 39. Not me, but amazing to see. I was in line for the Alice in Wonderland ride at Disneyland. All of a sudden, this woman starts screaming for them to stop the ride. Her kid is stuck. Emergency stop. I could see that something was seriously wrong. The kid's leg seemed trapped. Out of nowhere, this older gentleman comes running, hops a small fence, and runs to the little girl, shouting he is a doctor. He climbs up to where they are, and it turns out her pants got caught in the ride wheels, but she's fine. He got her untangled, and the ride shut down while Disney medical staff looked her over. The kind of funny thing was while walking away, he couldn't get back over the fence. It was just too high. Just goes to show what adrenaline can do to you. Super cool of him to react so quickly, and I was really glad she ended up being okay. Story 40. My mom is a doctor, epidemiologist to be specific, but she used to work as a surgeon and general practitioner. And we were on the airplane to JFK about 10 minutes from landing when the lights turned on, and the flight attendant called over the PA system asking for a doctor. My mom immediately got up and I stayed behind, but later, after we landed, she told me what happened. An old lady was in cold sweats, having difficulty breathing, and her husband was panicking. According to him, he had no idea what happened. After a while, she finally managed to figure out that the lady was diabetic and had eaten way too much food. This was in the evening, so we were given dinner and had too much sugar in her system. All it took was some insulin and she started to feel better. By this time, we had already begun descent, but my mom stayed with this lady until the airplane landed. My mom had to stay standing. After coming back to her seat, nobody gave a crap. There wasn't even a thank you from anyone, including the flight attendants. Story 41. On a plane. I may have told this story here, so forgive me. Flying from Munich to Toronto during my second year of residency, and a lady looked off and slumped over in her seat. They called for help, so I went over, put oxygen on her, and tried talking to her through an interpreter. She spoke German only. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and she was slightly confused and couldn't give me any history. I figured she had either undiagnosed lung disease, a pulmonary embolism, or maybe some heart condition. I asked the captain to land, but since she was no longer hypoxic and was now conversant, the crew said no. That lasted 10 minutes until she slumped over again, at which point I had two big dudes carry her to the back of the plane, had someone with a hand on her pulse, and started giving her oxygen with a bag valve mask. At this point, I basically demanded to have the plane land. She almost lost the pulse, and I nearly started chest compressions at 30,000 feet in the air. But with bagging, she regained a pulse and started moving again. I should mention that the equipment on the flight was awful. The stethoscope didn't work, and I couldn't hear good air movement. But I did manage to start an IV and give her an aspirin to chew in case of a heart attack and some Lasix as a Hail Mary. We landed in Scotland. The EMTs who came to get her had such thick accents I couldn't understand them. She walked off the plane and I flew first class to Toronto and got a free round-trip ticket from Air Canada. To this day, I'm not sure what the diagnosis was. 13 days ago, though, I graduated from the Pulmonary and Critical Care Fellowship, so I guess I like intense situations and hypoxemia enough to make a career out of it. Story 42. I was on a crowded subway with my wife and friends on the way to the US Open a couple of years ago in New York. As we got close to our destination, the subway stopped for an unusually long time, at which point I realized our car was the reason. A small circle had formed a few feet away from where I was standing, where a woman had collapsed. No one shouted, "Is there a doctor?" But my friend had seen it and told me, "Wow, it's too bad, no one can help that lady." I then realized something was wrong and I rushed over. It turned out this older woman had collapsed from hypoglycemia. I ended up starting chest compressions after she was unresponsive with no pulse, but they ended up being effective regaining responsiveness. Several passengers around me offered up their juice, yogurt, sugary foods, which she ate and started feeling much better. The police and paramedics arrived and she was taken for further care in good spirits. Story 43. I was a U.S. Navy hospital corpsman at the local grocery store late one night because I had a craving for a big fat sandwich, like the kind that Blondie made for Dagwood. Anyway, I had my cart full of sandwich ingredients when they called on the intercom and asked if there were any doctors around. I responded and discovered a distraught mother in the parking lot with a young child, maybe a year to 18 months, something like that, in the middle of a seizure. The poor kid was having some respiratory difficulty. I sat in the back of the lady's car holding her baby and trying to calm her down until the paramedics arrived with some much-needed O2. Anyway, they took off to the hospital pretty quick and I never found out what happened. I have always wondered, though. Story 44. I'm a dentist. Once I was on a date in a nice restaurant, which was going a bit awkward. Adjacent to our table was a couple with 3 kids of varying ages. I think the youngest was maybe 3, 4 years old. He was playing with those cheap pebbles in a vase on the table decoration, and all of a sudden he swallowed one. His mom gave out a shrill, "No, put that down, don't eat it, oh my God, call the doctors, blah, 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 blah," complete panic. I ran there, reached into her child's mouth, and used my fingers to safely remove it. He retched all over my nice dress immediately after I took out the pebble. The parents thanked us profusely, and I had to tell them to take him to an ENT anyways, as reaching in might have caused some irritation. My dress was a mess, and my non-medico date was visibly disgusted. I didn't get a second date. Story 45. My cousin is an ARNP and was on her way back from South Korea when she said the flight attendants called over the intercom for a doctor. They called a few more times, and with no one else responding, she got up and went to first class where the issue was, guy was having a heart attack. She kept him calm and talked to him while the pilot looked for a place to land. Wasn't much she could do for him except keep him awake and talking. The flight landed and EMTs were waiting. He made it through all right and later contacted her to thank her. The airline also contacted her to thank her and gave her, get this, a USB drive. Thanks? Story 46. Driving through South Park, Colorado 2 decades ago, I arrived on a scene of a single vehicle rollover, objects on ground as the SUV was far off the road. Young men and various camping supplies were strewn about. A couple of cars stopped, and I stopped, ran into the field, and arrived on scene. A lady was bracing a young kid's neck who was lying on the ground, clearly not doing well, and a man crouching next to him. Introduced myself, and the guy says he's an ED doc, a miracle. He's way more trained to run this scene. He asks if I have a stethoscope, which I don't. I just asked the kid's name, Noah, and kept my hand on his arm while the lady cradled his neck and the doctor ran to the next young man. Mind you, this is when South Park was much more rural and self-service was scant. Waiting for EMS took quite some time, and Noah's scared, pale face stayed with me as he was barely conscious. Once I got to Denver, I figured the kid had been flying for life to the St. Anthony's, one of 3 level 1 traumas. I called and spoke to a nurse in the ED to explain the situation. He told me that he couldn't tell me any details, but that Noah was indeed there with some kind of brain trauma. I don't know whatever happened to Noah, but I remember being in the field of him and asking his name. I couldn't do much, yet I'm glad I know his name as his face stays with me. Story 47. This happened a month ago when my wife and I were in Belize. We were on a cruise and a bunch of spoiled rich kids had just graduated high school, around 30 of them. Around 10:30, the first kid blacked out as her mom said, 2 shots of tequila. 45 minutes later, she began having a serious reaction, and the mom screamed, "Is anyone here a doctor?" The man sitting in the ocean with me said to me, "I'm an emergency room surgeon, but I'm on vacation," and continued to drink his beer. Story 48. My wife is a nurse. One night, we were at a billiard spot having a few drinks with friends when all of a sudden, this lady started having seizures. She was sitting on a bar-height stool and fell to the floor. There was music in that place, and I still heard her hit the ground. I grabbed my wife and pointed in the direction of where the lady fell. My wife had a few drinks by this time, but she felt she needed to help. So she started punching herself really hard as she's running towards the lady. Close fist to the jaw just to get from hammered to sober in 10 seconds, lol. It was intense at the moment. Luckily, she did that as no one else knew what to do. The bartenders didn't know what to do. Everyone seemed to be in shock, just staring at this poor lady. According to my wife, the lady could have passed away if she didn't rush to her and help her come out of it. Story 49. Not a doctor at all, but in college I worked as a CNA and had just redone my CPR certification a few weeks ago. I was walking from a building on campus to get to my car after a football game, and I recognized my friend who was holding a woman's head stable on the ground. Someone yelled, "She's not breathing!" So I ran over, checked for a pulse and breaths, told my BF at the time to call 911 and get an AED and start CPR, and eventually a first responder also happened to walk by when I began compressions and we switched off. AED never advised shock. Unfortunately, she passed away. I'd given my number to the police on scene once the ambulance had gotten there, and a family member called to let me know she didn't make it and that she went into diabetic shock and she hit her head when she fell. They thanked me, which I have always thought was incredible considering what happened and that we weren't able to revive her. I also remember a guy who tried to get in on it and it was so frustrating. This kid was like, "I can help, I'm pre-med," and the first responder with me said, "Do you know CPR?" And he said, "Kind of." Like, what? What do you mean, kind of? Story 50. My mom was a trauma ER nurse for many years, and we ended up stopping at the scene of a motorcycle accident on a really remote country road when I was in middle school. This was before cell phones were widely used, so someone had to drive to a phone and call for help. It was about 20 minutes before the ambulance was able to get there. My mom did everything she could on the side of the road with no equipment or even a pair of gloves, but the guy had serious injuries and unfortunately he didn't make it. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. I'll catch you in that video.